and welcome to the Facing Up podcast with me, Luke Grenfell-Shaw. Today, I've got Gemma Hillier Moses in the studio. Again, this is still a metaphorical studio. I'm still in Bristol. Gemma, you are, where are you?
Loughborough.
You're in Loughborough.
Yeah.
So you obviously, you went to university in Loughborough, did a lot of sport. You've been very sporty, a very good runner. But at the age of 24, you were diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma, stage 3. And that's really, I think, taken you on a journey that we'll explore a bit, but taken your life in a very, very sort of different way. Reading about some of the stuff that you've done at that time and since then is pretty incredible in itself. Doing the Great North Run during your chemo. I say that sounds great. I'm like, yeah, you go. That's awesome.
We're on the same wavelength though.
Yeah, we are a bit. So, and then after you got through your treatment, England running vests as well. But perhaps I think most excitingly, you've founded the Move charity, which is all about helping young people move through and beyond their cancer diagnosis through exercise, right?
Yeah. So and now it's we started out with young people to support them and inspire them when they're living with and beyond cancer through the power of physical activity and sport and exercise. But now obviously we've moved into anybody affected by cancer.
Right. Cool.
5K Away initiative. So
yeah,
which is amazing, really.
That is fantastic. And we will talk about that in some detail, I hope, later. But Gemma, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, thank you for having me on your new podcast. I'm very excited to be one of your guests.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. So, this podcast is all about, I guess, facing up to challenges. And can you just take us back a little bit? Before you got diagnosed with cancer, can you just kind of tell us who you were, like what your ambitions were, like, what your life was about? Can you set us the scene a bit?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of background. And I guess my life was always sport always played a big part in my life. And I think I didn't realise how important that was until I was diagnosed with cancer. So I lived in a village called Mount Sorrel. So I didn't go very far. It was in Leicestershire, so it's about 10 minutes away from Loughborough University. So I didn't move very far from my home. But I always knew Loughborough as a sporting university, and I played county hockey at school as well as running. And I also played mixed National League hockey and knew that sport was going to be a big part of my life, but I also wanted to study sport. So I love biology and I love sports. I wanted to bring the two together, and that's where I had the idea of doing a sports science degree. And I'm obviously I'm very competitive, so the only place that I wanted to go was the one that needed the highest grades and the best university to get into for sport and exercise science, which was Loughborough. So I'd gone to look at a few other universities, and I put Loughborough as both my top two choices. So I'd have been screwed if I didn't get 3 A's. But I knew that sport was a big part of my life, and I went to university and I did a lot of running. I also found university life, which was fun outside of running. So I wouldn't say I was a dedicated athlete at that time.
Yeah, because Loughborough is like a campus university. I'm guessing that's kind of quite a party culture, like pretty chill, pretty relaxed.
Yeah, and I think people don't realise that until they get there. Yeah, it's got an incredible student union, and the sports people party probably harder than anybody else does, which you think being dedicated to your sport. But at university, I made some incredible friends through running. So running gave me more than just running. It gave me the ability to travel around the world. So I went on a training trip every year, and one of the best ones that I went to was Flagstaff, America, for an altitude camp with my group, my Loughborough University. Yeah, so I spent 3 weeks.
America.
3 weeks with 15 girls and one coach. So that was an experience, and it was incredible. So we got to do things like that, and And it really taught me that it wasn't just about times and competition. There was much more to running than just that. And during my university career, I actually applied. So again, another competitive side of me. My course offered for 2 people out of our whole course intake to go to university in Australia to study for a semester. So I applied for that, and I remember being really proud of the statement letter that I wrote about my dreams and aspirations and why I wanted to go and do something different. So I actually went and spent my second semester of my second year in Australia at the University of Sydney.
Wow.
Which was absolutely incredible. And I travelled during that time. I learned so much. I met some incredible people. So again, that was a huge part of my journey. And then I came back.
Can I ask, what did you write in that letter? Like, what were your dreams and aspirations at that point? Can you take us back to what 21-year-old Gemma was thinking, or 20-year-olds? Gemma
Yeah,
was...
I'd like to say that was only a few years ago, but gosh, I'm going on 12 years now. A photo popped up today of me and my sister scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef on my Facebook memories. And that was 12 years ago. So that was when I was in Australia, because she came out to visit me. But I think in that letter, I just wrote, I definitely wrote about the power sport had on my life and the difference it made, the opportunities it provided me, but by being involved in it and going abroad to study, what that could open my life, what opportunities that could open up in my life, and the impact that it could have on me as a person and my future and my career. So I think it was, I definitely, and I remember this was also in my statement I wrote to try and get into Loughborough University. The power of sport always came back into everything I wrote about. And I think that to me is still, I mean, I didn't really realise the true power of it until I had cancer. But to me, that's just played a huge and important part of my life. And I came, so the experience in Australia, again, it was like one experience after next led on to, making my university career pretty incredible and very enjoyable and very diverse. So I actually came back, and in my 3rd year, I managed to get a brand ambassador position at the University with Nike. So Nike marketing did this whole campaign about getting university students into their Nike training club. And I applied, so Paula Ratcliffe did this big event at Loughborough, and I went along, and I was one of 6 girls out of probably a good 300-400 that got selected to be.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Right. And so how did that sort of shape what you wanted to do next then?
So once you start, if you do an ambassador role for Nike, you pretty much then want to work for them. I was like, this is the place I want to work, because I got to go to the London offices, I got to see the marketing team, I got to understand what real work in that industry was about.
What was it about?
Well, again, Nike, some people love them, some people hate them, but for me, I don't have a bad word to say about them as a company, because I went through my treatment and I was diagnosed with cancer while I was working for them, and they were absolutely incredible. But again, there are sports brands that are better. They're just the best. Like, they push boundaries, but they are, in terms of their marketing, their inspiration, they're getting people to move, the way they think about, I love an inspirational quote, and Nike are like, heads up there for inspiring you.
I have to say that my all-time favorite YouTube video is Rise and Shine, and I think Nike made that. And like whenever I listen to like the first like 3 seconds of that music, I kind of just get like the shivers down my back, and I'm like, and I can't not watch that video and like want to do something pretty badass afterwards, like making a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and I always say to myself, I think I live in a bit of a fairy tale land, because every time I hear a motivational quote, I'm like, right, I'm gonna go do this. It's like they give me a spark in my brain. And working for Nike, yes, it wasn't all glamorous. There was a lot of hard work, and I worked in London and didn't really enjoy London life. But as a brand, to me, they said the right messages. They were inspiring. They challenged you in a way that I'd never been challenged before, in terms of as a 21-year-old starting work there. So yeah. So
what did you think of corporate life? Because you're not still in it. So, but it was obviously in a lot of ways very positive. So what was corporate life like for you?
Yeah, interesting. So In my first, so there's parts of it I absolutely loved, and I didn't like when I moved to London. So before I moved to London, so for about 4 years I was field based, and it was incredible because I could manage my own diary. I've always been quite really hardworking but independent as well, and because I went to Nike so young, so I was 21, I hadn't worked anywhere else, so I hadn't worked in an office before. So I enjoyed working from home and I was very productive. And also I got, the amazing thing with Nike was I got to go on sales conferences I went to Portland, Oregon first on a rookie camp. So I was able to go and, Steve Prefontaine, who you'll know, so I got taken round told about Pre-story by Jeff Hollister, who was a second employee by Nike, but was also sat at the house with Pre, having a beer the night that he died, basically. So the stories that I was told, again, storytelling came from people who were there at the very beginning of Nike. Wow. So there through Pre-story,
yeah,
which mind-blowing.
Nike folklore, isn't it?
Yeah, and like that was in my first 6 months of working there. I was in Oregon, like I was going to Eugene, I was being taken around the Nike campus. Like at 21 years old, that's pretty mind-blowing. So you can see why I was very career driven at that point, and and the benefits, like I got to go on sales conferences in Orlando. I got to go, where else did I go? I went to the Netherlands and Amsterdam and went to the headquarters there. So, and I can't remember, but there was 3 other conferences I went to, which were just insane, really. So when I moved down to London was after I had cancer, and I think after I had cancer, I realised that the corporate world just wasn't for me. So I think once you've had cancer, my perspective massively changed, and that's when I could see through. Not that Nike was bullshit, but I could see that people were trying to live lives that they weren't necessarily happy with. They were on a hamster wheel, going on the train to central London, going to the office, coming home again, and that was life day in, day out. And I just very quickly was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I'm almost intrigued. I'm really intrigued that you, after going through your cancer treatment, that you went back to Nike in a corporate job, because from my perspective, I just couldn't imagine sort of wanting to spend my time in that way. So take us through, maybe we need to go back a few steps as well, like, and maybe fast forward, come through to that point. Okay, but first of all, like, why did you just go back to Nike?
So what happened was I finished my treatment in November 2012. So my treatment wasn't as long, very aggressive, but wasn't as long. And then
actually, let's go right back. Can you, and then we'll fast forward to Nike. So can you tell us a bit about? I mean, this was what, like 12? You were 24 at the time. I'm trying to do my maths in my head, and I don't want to get it wrong. What year are we talking about? You were working for Nike?
Yeah.
And
so it
something went wrong at some point.
Yeah, it was 2012. So what happened first was I was going in and out of London from Loughborough in March 2012. So the first step to this whole thing was that I fell off the train between the Gap and the train station. So whenever you see Mind the Gap, I went straight down that gap. This is the first incident that happened in 2012. Yeah. So embarrassing.
How did you do? Is that there's enough space? Like, I've always thought it would be a tight squeeze, but you managed it.
If you've ever been to Loughborough train station, the gap is huge, and I don't know how more people don't just fall off this gap. And we were talking earlier about being on your phone, and yes, I was on my phone carrying my luggage and doing too many things while trying to get off a train. And I do not know how it happened, but I just went straight down the gap, and my ankle just smacked against the platform on my way down.
Oh.
Yeah, and me, like, so I was actually like legs hanging down platform underneath the train, and my arms on the platform basically. And yeah, so you either laugh or cry at this moment. So I was like, I'm fine. Somebody help me up. So somebody helped me up. The train got obviously stopped. But that was the first incident of the kind of all of the things that happened in 2012. So that was in the March, and I ended up having a operation, having a pin. My ankle was quite badly broken in an area that if I didn't have the right rehab, I would have probably never run again. So for me, that was the most devastating thing, because as a runner, and I was a runner that was, I'd moved to a new coach and I was improving very quickly. So I was coming into my best years I'd ever had running wise. So on crutches for 10 weeks after an operation, not knowing you're going to be able to run again was absolutely heartbreaking. And yeah.
You've already told us just how important running was. And so, yeah, for you not to be able to run. And I can relate to that. Those times when I've been injured, like as a triathlete, I'm so glad I've got another sport to kind of run to, metaphorically sometimes, you know, just to keep me sane. So I can imagine it felt incredibly.
Yeah, and I think, and people, even now, even I've had cancer, and running injuries are really tough. Like, I don't think we should ever undervalue that when it gets taken away, you're not be able to do something you love, even if it's not, you know, really serious or life-threatening, it still is very, very difficult. Like, I spent 10 weeks at home on crutches. I was in my dream career. I was running really well, and then suddenly that was all taken away from me. And that was really, really difficult. Also, the fact that I couldn't move anywhere because I'd had this operation. And I think that also the fact that I didn't know whether I would ever be able to run again. But luckily, I had a very, very good physio who was part of British Athletics at the time, Renee Thompson, and she treated me privately, and she had me in the pool like 4 hours a day doing walking up and down the pool and aqua jogging.
4 hours?
Yeah.
That's insane.
I remember walking up to the pool, crutching up to the pool, and then being in there a very long time doing drills, doing strength exercise, doing everything in there. And luckily Loughborough, like, this is the amazing facilities at Loughborough, they are incredible. So for rehab and things like that, you know, you're not going to just a public swimming pool when you've got kids flying around everywhere. Like, it's really, the facilities are made for sports people, so it's pretty amazing. But I found that, so that period of time, I had something to focus on, but it was still very difficult. But when I was during my build up and my rehab, I was aqua jogging with a friend to keep my cardiovascular fitness up and try and build that again. And I noticed a lump in my neck, and it was quite a hard lump. And she said, well, maybe you're just a bit run down. And then 2 weeks later, the lump was still there, and it was still quite small at the time. So I went to the GP, and the GP looked at it and said, well, I'll do a blood test, so we'll check that out. But in the meantime, I'm going to refer you to the ear, nose and throat specialist to get this lump checked out. She said, don't worry about it and don't Google it, but it could be something called lymphoma, but didn't say cancer, just said lymphoma. So I went home and I Googled it. And which you do.
Yeah, don't Google it. Of course I'm going to Google it.
But since I've had cancer actually and gone through treatment, I definitely don't Google. I didn't Google anything when I was going through my treatment, because I was like, I might as well jump off a cliff if I Google everything. I think you change your perspective. I changed my perspective once I started going through my treatment. But at that point, you know, I didn't know anything about what that was.
I feel it's a bit like, you know, this is a bit of an obscure reference, but you know, Lord of the Rings and like the Ring, and like you either kind of want to be like Frodo, who knows nothing, or like Gandalf, who knows everything. And the people most susceptible to the ring are the people who know like a little bit, like Boromir. And I think it's the same. This is like a really weird like analogy, but like when you know a little bit about what you're going through, it's like it scares the shit out of you, basically. But it's sometimes like ignorance is bliss, or you kind of need to be like knowing everything to kind of really know what the situation is like.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And I don't think you can ever get to either, can you? That's the horrible thing. No, that is, So I was just going to say that lump, then I got seen at an ear, nose and throat specialist, and unfortunately they diagnosed it as a cyst. So I was misdiagnosed quite badly, actually, because the lump in my neck got bigger and bigger, and that's one of the reasons why my cancer developed very quickly, because of the type of cancer it was, and it doesn't take long to spread at all. So once it spread, like I was only one, by the time I was properly diagnosed, the only place it hadn't gone was to my spinal cord and my brain. So it could have been, the situation could have been a lot better had it been diagnosed at that point in time.
Yeah.
But what happened was that it was diagnosed as a cyst, and I was working at Nike at the time, and the London Olympics were in the summer. And as a job in marketing, it's probably one of the biggest events or showcases that you could ever work at. And yes, Nike weren't the headline sponsor, but there was so much activation and stuff going on around London that I would have been part of. So I actually asked for this operation to remove the cyst to be moved until September. And on the NHS, that would have been fine. But luckily, and I think the NHS is absolutely incredible at a lot of things, but in terms of that misdiagnosis, but also the operation having to wait so long for an operation, because I couldn't have it the next week, and they were like, you can't have it for 3 months because of waiting lists. So if I'd have waited, I wouldn't have been here. So I had private health cover with Nike, and I was in Amsterdam for work, and I had this lump on my neck, and I was like, I just can't go on another day, because I had headaches, I was tired, it was just aching, and it was really big. Like I've got photos, and it's sticking out my neck, like it.
How can you, like a golf ball, a tennis ball? What are you talking about?
Probably like is it lacrosse ball? Like I'm showing you because you can see me, but probably
just choosing an obscure ball to help.
Yeah.
How big is a lacrosse ball after?
Probably 2 hockey balls put together.
2 hockey balls?
Yeah, 2 hockey balls put together coming out of my neck. Yeah, it wasn't a very nice thing to have around. And I think, and then I was like, I googled cysts, do they grow? And they said, in Google it said yes.
And this is like really interesting to hear, because even at this point, like someone from the outside could have gone in and said, like, looking back and say, Gemma, like, what were you thinking? Seriously, there was this huge lump and you didn't think it was something super serious. But that's exactly what I did as well. I had this huge thing round the back of my left shoulder, huge swelling, and it just did not occur to me. I just did not see it as serious.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are the same with that. My issue as well was that I had a diagnosis. So I went to an ear, nose and throat specialist. They ultrasounded it and they told me it was a cyst. So in a way, I had no reason to think otherwise, because they were the experts and I wasn't fully aware of the other symptoms that I was having. So I had like a bad stomach for about a month, and I blamed it on a dodgy Nando's that I had. I was like, oh, that dodgy Nando's is still in my stomach.
Yeah, a very cheeky Nando's.
Yeah, and I remember walking around London I was going to a ball and I was shopping for a dress, and I remember getting like quite hot and sweaty, like not normal. I wouldn't normally feel that way, but I remember just thinking, oh, it's London. And London always exhausted me anyway. Like at that point, I wasn't living there. I was going in and out from Loughborough for work. And I always felt exhausted through that work anyway. So you don't look at those signs and symptoms. And I think I know a lot about cancer now, but back then I was 24. I didn't have anybody in the family who had it. I wasn't aware of anything. So like I didn't follow anybody. Now there's lots, you can see Teenage Cancer Trust putting about go to your GP, the signs and symptoms. But back in the day, I didn't follow those type of accounts or people. So
why would you?
My world wasn't surrounded by cancer, and I didn't know any other young person who had it. So why would I think I had it? Yeah,
I think there's a really important point here about the dangers of not so much the misdiagnosis, that is obviously huge, but it's the fact that I thought it was a wing scapula. I was told by a physio it was a wing scapula, and I was like, great, I know what it is. I think the danger is that we we just accept what we've been told rather than being a bit more skeptical, and being a bit quicker on like, oh, is it really that? I feel that's the biggest danger, that we can be lulled into this false sense of security because we got it named as something.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think looking back, I should have pushed a lot more, because it was obvious how I was feeling. A cyst wouldn't make you feel well. It can do, but it probably wouldn't have made me feel like that. And unfortunately, by the time I I went in to have this cyst removed. So still on July the 3rd. So I got diagnosed with a cyst in end of March, I think. July the 3rd was when I went to have it removed. And so that's quite a long time for because lymphoma spreads very quickly. So by the time they tried to remove the cyst and they couldn't remove it, and they came back afterwards not being able to remove it, and 3 days later the biopsy showed that I had cancer. It also spread to my abdomen and bowel, and I had 13 centimetre tumours. So probably from maybe just before March.
13 centimetres. Wow.
To July, the spread was just so quick. And if I hadn't had that operation on July the 3rd, then I don't think I'd have been here 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, because they said you've probably had a month left to be able to, without that spread, because it's just so aggressive.
Wow, a month. Yeah. I think it's truly very, very scary how quickly these things can develop. Like in the space of 3 weeks for me, I had just a tennis ball grow beneath my armpit, essentially, before I started my chemo.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? And I think, like you said, we do really need to be aware of those signs and symptoms. And I think, mine was 7 years ago now, and I hope a lot has changed, but I still worry that it's because I'm in the space a lot around Twitter and other social that I see it all the time about looking and checking at signs and symptoms, but I'm still worried that people don't see it enough. And it can happen, it's happened to me and you, it can happen to anybody. We were both fit and healthy and doing sport. It does. Yeah, especially in young people, it doesn't necessarily, it can just come on with no lifestyle factors, nothing. It's just there, isn't it?
And so take me back to the moment where you've done really well throughout your time at school, and then Loughborough, and you're in this great job with Nike. The Olympics are coming up, and then they tell you that it's not a cyst. How did that feel?
So yeah, I was in the consultant room with my mum and dad, and I knew something wasn't right. It was pretty obvious because the lump hadn't been removed after the operation. So and they called me in 3 days later, so I knew things were going to have to move pretty quickly. But I didn't expect cancer. And again, when they told me, I still didn't know enough about it to realise. I pretty much knew it was very serious, but the first thing, so they told me and I cried, and initially, because that is also my natural reaction. I might be a strong person, but I also cry. I've got the waterworks that just turn on. But
that's not a contradiction.
Yeah, and I just remembered looking, I think I felt so bad for my parents, and I just remember looking at the consultant and I literally said, am I going to die? And his answer was, we can't answer that question, but you're going to be seeing a very good consultant who he knew personally, who's in Leicester, who's extremely good and is an expert in this area and your type of cancer. So that's the first step. And they did say the prognosis hopefully is good, and it depends on how you go through the treatment. But they said the treatment's going to be extremely aggressive to be able to get on top of this. And I started treatment 2 days later. So that was, or 3 days later, I think. So that was the reality that I don't say, for example, fertility wise, people like my age would have their eggs frozen because they don't know what cancer effect to have and the ability to be able to have children if I survived in years to come. That wasn't even an option. It was 3 days later, you're going straight in to be able to save your life. And I remember my first appointment with my consultant, who's now actually a trustee on a charity, and she's an incredible woman, and having her to support me during treatment, she was basically all business, no bullshit. This is what goes on, and I needed that. I needed somebody who was, and I think this comes from running, that was this is the process. This is what we're gonna do, and you just need to follow that. So that for me,
I see that it's like a training set, isn't it?
Yeah, like a training session. Someone puts it down, I follow the plan, and off we go.
That's really interesting, because I was speaking with Lucy Gossage a few days ago, and she was saying the difficulties in knowing how prescriptive to be, sometimes, the patient, or when she was a patient, she just wanted to be told this is exactly what to do. Whereas other patients want more of a say.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like it worked for you.
Yeah, and I think that's the case again of everybody's very different. But I think why I work so well with my consultant and why it helped me, why it helped my mindset was because I didn't want anyone who was fluffy around the edges, who, you know, mollycoddled me or kind of got emotional with me. I needed somebody who was straight to the point, who told me the reality and who told me what I needed to focus on and what was going to happen. And it was like the first day, and they were telling you, you know, you had to have a bone marrow biopsy when you're awake. So for those of you people who don't know it, and a lot of people with leukemia have it a lot more often, but you know, they're taking bone from your hip joint or your hip, clamping things down, removing bone while you're awake to do the biopsy.
Why do you have to be awake?
Because I wasn't under the age of 18 so, at the time. So it's obviously, it is very, very painful, but they think you can manage it. And oh my God, that was the first thing I experienced, after I'd been diagnosed, and then when I first went in hospital, they had to do that to see how far it had gone into my, to my spinal cord and my bones. So pulling that hip bone out and giving me some gas and air and then just patching me up and then saying off you go after it. I was like, that is the most painful thing I've ever been through. I was like, why can't I be put to sleep? But I think and a lot of people who go through cancer, depending on what your cancer is, do have it. And I thought I'd had a strong pain threshold. And I was like, my God, that's horrific. Wow. And then they had to then do a lumbar puncture. So if anyone's had a lumbar puncture before, is where they, you know, take fluid out of your spinal cord with a massive needle and then insert chemotherapy when it becomes the lumbar puncture. And again, that is the most horrific. I mean, the thought of it's more horrific than probably the actual right. Pain one. But again, if you have a treatment and you're going through stuff like that, it's horrendous.
I mean, the nuts and bolts of that sound pretty nasty. Did you? I mean, I just remember when I was diagnosed, everything seemed to kind of fall apart and kind of crumble for me. All my expectations, and the prognosis for me was, they didn't say, you've got a good chance or anything like that. So that was really tough. But you sounded quite, I don't know if you were unfazed, yes, but it sounded like you was kind of quite business-like, and like 2 days later, 3 days later, you got going. But was there a whole kind of you had to reassess your life sort of point, or was there not enough time for that? Or
yeah, I think, and like you said, I think by them saying the prognosis hopefully would be okay. They can never tell you because they don't know. But I wasn't told that I had terminal cancer. So again, that gives you a bit of a, for me, that gave me something to hold on to. Mm-hmm. I guess I was still extremely upset. I remember going home, and Lewis, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, I remember just bursting into tears and being, just being all over the place. But the first thing I actually did, now I never wrote blogs or anything, but I went upstairs, I went into my bedroom on my own, and I wrote a letter to myself, basically. And I'm just checking am I still on here? Yeah, you can still hear me.
Yeah.
So I wrote a letter to myself, and I released it as a blog later on, but it basically, I just said, there's too much of me to give to the world, I'm not ready to go yet. And I guess it was the affirmation. Looking back now, it was probably me talking to myself in that way, was the affirmation that I needed to get on with what I needed to do. And I think at that moment I'd learned a lot from sport. So I'd learned, I mean, it's not the same, but I'd learned the skills of, in running, it's a sport with very little reward. So I always talk about it, I put my whole life into running, and I trained 70, 80 miles a week, and everything went towards it. And I got very, very little back. I didn't ever get paid for it, and I don't get paid for it. You may get good results and times, but you get very little back from it. And I think that kind of taught me that, yes, you get knocked down again and again and again, but I took it as this was another challenge that I had to focus on that process instead of the outcome. It was the only way that mentally that I could get through this. And I really believe that I did that. And my husband and my family are very similar in mindset, so I think that really helped, especially my husband, who I spent most of my time with, he has that exact mindset, and that really, really helped me because I was only surrounded by people who had that same mindset.
Yeah, I think there's a wider point here, isn't there, about the environment that you create for yourself by the people you choose to spend your time with. And this, I think, is very relevant to going through cancer, but it's we were talking about it earlier actually as well, sort of, surrounding yourselves by people who are passionate, who have that kind of spark. Like it makes a world of difference. And you don't, it's like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. You don't even realize that, you weren't feeling the sun's rays.
Yeah. And it is extremely important because, and sometimes, you gravitate towards those people, or it takes time in your life to realize who's important to you and who's just dragging you down. And doesn't mean you have to get rid of people, because it may be, it might be family members, but it also means that you can be selective who you spend your time with. But I think I was very lucky that, my parents and my sister had very similar mindsets, which I think we developed growing up. And I really believe that sport gave me that mindset and that grounding. But I think one thing I learned when I first started treatment, and this is a very selfish way to be, but I'm okay with that because it really helped me. But I had a big tunnel vision, and I call it a tunnel vision because I tried to not care about anything else at that period of time other than what I needed to do to go get through this treatment. And I cared about people, I did care about people. I kept my relationships, but for example, when I was in hospital, and I was at the time, Leicester didn't have a teenage and young adult cancer ward, so I was treated in an adult ward. So you were surrounded by people at a very different age range, people in their 90s, which still deserve to have exactly the same care and attention. But for a young person at 24, that was not the environment that I wanted to be in.
No, I was lucky when I went through my treatment to be in the teenage and young adult ward, which Teenage Cancer Trust raised the money for. And I didn't realize, I had my own room and stuff, and I had, my mum, my dad come and sleep on the couch, and I didn't realize just how amazing that was until I spent one afternoon in the adult ward. And it's really, I'll be very honest that it felt really demotivating and crushing, actually. It was not an inspiring environment to be in. And everyone has to go through it just as they are, of course, but when you're 24, it doesn't make you excited for life.
No, and I agree. And now, having seen the teenage and cancer ward, you're still going through treatment and cancer on those wards, that's still a reality. But like you say, it's the environment. The environment just isn't about the people. It's about, in the adult wards, the treatment was incredible, what you've got given, but the hospital's not, those wards aren't inspiring. But I think for me, going back to the tunnel vision side of things, I just remember my consultants really fought for me to have my own room. So there's always one room on a ward that's for the most sick and vulnerable. And my cancer, the treatment I was going through, it did make me the most sick and vulnerable because I was going through extremely aggressive treatment and I was very prone to infection. So I remember one part of my treatment where they couldn't find a room for me because everywhere was full. And I remember I sat outside first, and then I sat in the day room, and there was nobody in the day room, so everybody was on the ward in the bays. And I basically refused to go in the ward because I was told that I had no white blood cells, I can't fight infection, and yet I was being put on a ward with other people. And I think the tunnel vision and the kind of sport stubbornness of me was well, you've told me this information, so why the hell am I going to spend time in a ward with people who could pass something on to me? So I remember being sat in the day room, and I said, I'm sleeping in here if I have to. That was I look back at it and I'm like, that's a bloody stubborn place to be, Gemma. But actually, it's also being aware of what you need to do at this point in time to help you survive. Because I didn't want to get an infection that would kill me. I wasn't prepared to do that. So I was very lucky then that I remember halfway through the day, I saw these consultants marching down the ward, and they were my consultants were trying to find me a bed because they knew that I needed a room, and that was the best thing to do for me. So I think, like you say, I think looking back, I probably I had a tunnel vision approach, which really helped me in my mindset, and that was important to me. But I don't think I developed that. I just think that was who I was.
Yeah. And before we, I feel like we're beginning to fast forward our way back to Nike, but there's what you did partway through your chemo treatment, you know, partly because, right, there wasn't a teenage and young adult ward where you were. You did the Great North Run half marathon. How?
Yeah, so that came about by my partner Lewis, who's now my husband. But so another thing during treatment, so I'd gone through a lot of cycles in hospital, and then when I wasn't, so I had all my chemotherapy in hospital through, you know, the drip and the Hickman line. But then when I was recovering, I was out of hospital. So I had an infection in between one cycle, and it was a really nice day. So we cycled into the hospital, and it was from, I think, from my mum and dad, so Mount Sorrel to the Leicester Royal Infirmary, which you go through beautiful Watermead Park. But anyway, when you arrive at a hospital with you've probably done it as well, but a cycle helmet on, yep. And you go to get your antibiotics, you get a lot of funny looks. We were on that cycle ride, and Lewis, there was the Our Space appeal going on at the same time, which was to raise the money to build the TYA, Teenage and Young Adult unit.
Right.
So that was so my consultant was involved in raising that money. So Leicester Hospitals were doing a massive appeal at the time, so we were aware of that. And you know, when they said about they could have a ward for young people that'd be similar to my age, that'd be able to be treated, I was like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing, because I wouldn't like anybody else to be treated where I was. So my husband on the cycle ride was just like, Lewis was just like, Gemma, wouldn't it be amazing? You've got cancer. Why don't you go and run the Great North Run? Because we have friends who work for the Great North Run. Why don't you go and run it? You'd raise so much money for this appeal because you've got cancer, and you know, you're in a really tough situation, and you can go and do it. And I laughed at him and I said, yeah, but you don't know how it feels. Like, I'm cycling and I'm out of breath.
Yeah. How did that feel? Like someone saying, oh, you know, kind of presuming to know what you might want to do. Like, I think my reaction would have been like, back off, like, you know, don't try and tell me what to do. I've got enough on my plate right now. But like, how did it feel to you?
Mine and Lewis's relationship is pretty much like that. So as soon as he goes, I think you can, like, Gem, why don't you do this? I'm like, yeah, why can't I do this? So he knows that I think what deep down he knew that that's what I needed, because it was probably the best thing now that anybody's ever suggested to me, because I think during my treatment, raising money, I was refreshing pretty much every hour. While I was in hospital, I was refreshing my Just Giving page. But also, even though I wasn't running much, like I was doing bits of exercise, but I was, you know, I could only, when I got further on in my treatment, I could only like run and walk for a mile. Like, I was knackered and it was really hard. So I wasn't doing much training, but it's still in my mind, I was like, I need to go out for that walk or little jog because I've got this coming up. And so I think Lewis suggesting that, I was like, I laughed at it at first, and then I was like, you know what, that's a really good idea, because what it gave me was, what at that time when he suggested it, what I thought was, it's going to give me something to focus on outside of cancer. And people might be like, well, that's ridiculous. You've got enough to think about and enough going on. And I had, you know, a lot of people from work, people from Nike, and my friends and people around me said, Gemma, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You don't have to do this. But I remember saying, because people started to get a bit worried that I was doing it. I was going through quite aggressive treatment and I still had cancer. But I just said to Lewis, I said, I just know that this is the right thing to do. And I feel like even if I walk around, like, he was so right, mentally, it was the best thing that I could have ever done.
Yeah, it's so interesting you said, you know, it gives you another focus outside of your cancer. And I feel that's something that needs to change more in the way that it's treated. And it needs to be recognized that that's not just like optional for the patients who want to do it. I think that should be fundamental. Like, as far as possible, each person going through treatment, having an outside focus, I think is enormously empowering. it gives you a different identity. You're not just this patient. It means that you can like focus on other things. It doesn't mean that one negative thing is consuming your life. So I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, and I think like from your story, you've had the same feeling, and that thing that you can go and do that's not it's not that, so it's not letting the cancer define you. So for me, it was like, yes, I was going through a journey with cancer and treatment, but I also had something else to talk about. And for me, every time somebody came to see me or visit, it wasn't just about the cancer. Like they'd say, hi, how are you? And like, I'm like, I'm not feeling very well. But then we'd go straight on to talking about the Great North Run, or then after the Great North Run, it'd be like, wow, what did you do? So I feel like I had these two worlds that were going on at the same time. And I think, like you say, people can get very daunted about hearing, you know, we've talked about it before, hearing me and you say, I did a half marathon, or I'm doing a cycle ride from Beijing to Bristol to Beijing, which is mind blowing for a lot of people. But I think what I always say is, you know, for me, the Great North Run was achievable. So I knew that you know, if I walked round, I'd still get round. Like that was the reality of it. And I think people can also choose things that are achievable to them and that aren't unrealistic, but would still challenge them and give them something to focus on.
Absolutely. It's about, you know, it's having a challenge that that you want to do, that kind of excites you, but is definitely achievable, and it's sort of your unique challenge rather than doing what is a challenge for someone else.
Yeah, and we've seen it through our 5K Away and our Move initiative and our online programs. Like we've seen people doing things that they never thought were possible when they're going through cancer treatment, or when they finished, or whether they've got a terminal cancer diagnosis. And you know, to them, they're like, oh, my challenge isn't anything special, or it's not, but it is to them. It's something that has separated cancer and basically they've had two things going on in their life, not just cancer. And that's what makes it special, because like you say, then you're able to take your mind into two different places and be switched on when you need to be switched on.
And I think it also, there's I haven't thought about it too much, but when friends and family meet you, there's something else you can talk about, and it makes it easier for them as well. Not that you should be doing it, I think, ever for other people, but I think that's just another kind of positive side effect, that people aren't like, oh, so how was the treatment?
Yeah.
You enjoying that chemo?
Yeah. And
no, it's like, Gemma, tell us about your training.
Yeah, and I agree. Like there was, you know, there's a lot of awkward moments when people come and visit your hospital and like, hi, are you okay? And you're like, no, I'm not okay. I don't just want to talk about like it's right. Like, it's, you know, cancer does, as much as you don't want it to define you, it becomes part of you, whether you like it or not. And you know, it's still a part of my life now, but I guess to have something else to focus on means that you have something else to talk about, and you know, you're not just a cancer patient, which for me was extremely important. And that's why I say the Great North Run is one of my proudest moments. I like, even, you know, my time wasn't, it's still quick to a lot of people. This is why, you know, 2 hours and I think officially 2 hours and 23 minutes, but to me that's miles away from who I was as an athlete. But yet it will always be my proudest moment, because I always say, so at that point my body was rock bottom, but my mind was able to take me to a place that nobody else believed was possible. And that just also shows the power of the mind. And some people are further forward with their mindset than others, but that doesn't mean you can't work and develop it to help you in your life.
And what difference did it make when you started training for the Great North Run, like physically, or the direct impact on your mental mind state as well from the exercise? Did it have an impact, or did you just end up feeling more tired or something because of it?
Yeah, I think, you know, I was going through some pretty tough treatment at the time. So I think I don't think I really trained for the Great North Run when I did it. I've said to people, like, I tried to do some home workouts, and I remember, so when I first got out of a 6-week, my first phase of treatment was 6 weeks in hospital, and I was in I was in a bone marrow unit, which I didn't have a bone marrow transplant, but it was quite a dangerous first cycle of treatment, because they were getting all the tumours out of my body through the aggressive chemotherapy. So once I left the hospital at that point, I asked the consultant, not my consultant, proper consultant, like ones that come in and do the ward rounds. I asked them if I could go for a 30-minute run, and he was absolutely not. Like, you won't be running probably a year post chemotherapy because somebody else who's had the same treatment as you didn't get back to exercise a year post finishing. And I just didn't. In my mind, I was like, well, he's not me, or like that person, that person's fine. They can do what they want to do, but that isn't me. Again, stubborn and single-mindedness. But then I went to ask the nurse, and she was. And so if you don't get the right answer from one person,
of course,
I would have gone to the cleaner if I needed to. But I went to ask her, and she just said, look, put your running kit on, start with the walk, and just see how you feel. So I got out, and again, I think to prove to myself that I could run and that actually I felt okay at this point, I went for a 30-minute run. And it felt amazing because, again, I think I proved to myself that it wasn't just about cancer, and that I then felt normal again, being able to just go for a run. And at that point, it wasn't like a run that I used to feel. I was tired and it was hard. But again, I think my mindset just gave me the opportunity to do it. And I enjoyed it. And I knew pretty quickly that running wouldn't be the same while I was going through treatment. So I didn't try and stick to a program or a plan. So I just tried to move when I could. I walked. I remember 3 weeks before the Great North Run, I went to try and do a 6-mile run because I thought, I'm going to do a half marathon here. I've got to get a move on with my training. And I went out for a 6-mile run, and I got to a mile and stopped, and I was like, I can't do this, I'm too tired. And I just walked back. But I remember being okay with it, which is weird because, I'm quite competitive. I stick to my training, and running was a big part of my life. But I just remember being like, oh, well, just listen to your body.
It shows like quite a big change in your mindset, right? To actually kind of accept the situation rather than want it to be something else.
Yeah, and I think I spoke to someone recently about that, about acceptance. And I think that it is very hard to do, but once you accept your current situation, you are able to be okay with what happens. So that going out for a 6-mile run and only being able to do a mile and then coming back, I was, it didn't really upset me. It was just like, well, this is what it is. Like, I am going through a bigger situation. Like, my perspective had changed because I'm like, it's not just about running fast times anymore. It's also about saving my own life through my treatment. So going out for a walk, at least I've done something. So I think acceptance is really important to be able to move forward. And I know people talk a lot about adjusting to the new normal. And I think I was, I never really used that word because I think that life is different pretty much every day, week, month, year. So for me, and I speak to my friend who's a psychologist, and she, like, with kind of our mental health as well, we go through, it's not like you like this all the time, then you suddenly go down, which can happen.
Not always going up and then
you are like on a, not up and down, and that's what life. So for me, I'm like, what I was last week is probably different to what I am this week. So you're constantly on the flow of a new normal, and I think just accepting that is important to then be able to move forward and be okay with what you do, really.
And so you got through your treatments. You did an amazing job at the Great North Run. You raised like £30,000.
Yeah, we raised 25,000, which I was incredibly proud of. Yeah,
which is amazing. That's just an incredible achievement, and I always think it shows the incredible generosity of like everyone donating as well, which wouldn't be possible without them, right? So
and it's mind-blowing because, like, I think when you're around fundraising a lot, you see like people raising millions, and then you take for granted actually 25,000 is so much money. And I remember doing the Great North Run, and I had an interview with Denise Lewis, and I remember when I got back, when I'd finished the Great North Run, somebody told me within the space of that interview, our fundraising page had gone up like £10,000. And I was like, 10,000 is an incredible amount of money that I never raised anything near that in my whole entire life. And the fact that I knew where that money was going and that it was going to help other people like me when they are going through their treatment to be treated on a ward that's more suitable to them. And I just felt, again, I think that's why it did become my proudest moment, because again, it wasn't just about running the Great North Run, it was also about a bigger picture on what this money could actually do to help others. So I guess I was doing the Great North Run for myself, but I really wasn't, because I was doing it for a bigger, to have a bigger impact and a bigger cause.
So you got through your treatments, you did the North Run. I guess at some point you got given an all clear of sorts from your doctors, and then you restarted back at Nike.
Yeah.
Why Nike? Like, I mean, this only reflects my own sort of perspective, which and it's, how imperfect it is. But I just would have thought, like, after this journey, after kind of realizing how valuable life is, you still went back to this corporate world. Explain to me how and why.
Yeah, it's really, no one's ever asked me that question, actually. So it's really, I'm glad you've actually asked me, because I get a chance to explain why. So when I went into remission in November. So I didn't get the all clear for 5 years, because I had to have all my checks and things. So I got the all clear 5 years later, but I was in the first year still a high chance of my cancer coming back. But I think at the very start of my treatment, just to take you back, I remember most people asked, why me? And then I'd obviously met a lot of people along the way and lost friends who'd been treated same hospital cancer for no reason other than that, no one's fighting harder. I hate that word. Fighting
Agreed.
was, it's interesting with that word, just to go off topic, but I think I needed to be in a battle with cancer, with me personally, but only because of my mindset. So I wouldn't say it out loud, but for me, I was like, I'm in a fight here. But I agree that word should never be used, because no one's fighting any stronger than anybody else. It's just the reality of the disease and what we're having to deal with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it's not like some people have this kind of, if you have a super strong willpower, it's somehow going to stop cells dividing or make chemo more effective. I think that's nonsense.
Yeah.
But I think, and I think all this, the words, the syntax we use with fight and battle are deeply unhelpful. But I guess my other perspective on that is that there are certain things that we can do to at least make that time more enjoyable. And I would like to think that exercise and focusing on your exercise and diet does have an impact. And there's increasing amount of evidence to show it does have an impact on the efficacy of treatment and your chances of a longer lifespan.
Yeah.
But I don't think that should ever get mixed up with this kind of battle and fights kind of imagery.
Absolutely, and I do, and I think people want to personally use those words with them. That resonates to some people. Like, some people need to be fighting something, and that's we shouldn't be against that either. If that's something that relates to you and you're going for your treatment, that's absolutely fine. But like you said, general words, we shouldn't necessarily be using that. But I do think the mind is very powerful, though. That actually, I think there's not enough research into the power of the mind and the positivity when going through cancer treatment, and how that actually can affect things. I think, that has a slight relation to exercise and the endorphins and how that makes you feel. But that's kind of going off topic anyway. But going back, so I guess when I was put into remission, I started to feel how lucky I was. So I stopped. People always ask, do you not ask why me? And I think very early on, when you can't be told why you've got cancer, like, they can't really explain why it happened or where it came from. So again, that's part of the acceptance, that you realize, well, I can't keep asking why me, because I'm not going to get any answers. So I may as well now, along the journey of the treatment, and then at the end, I started to feel like, actually, I'm very lucky to be in this situation, to be in remission. Yes, I don't know what the future holds yet, but I'm only going to focus on what I can control. So that's how my mindset worked. And what happened with going back to work? So as a company, Nike were absolutely incredible to me. So in terms of my wage, in terms of the support I got, the team, the gifts I got, like, I've got this massive frame that's signed by everybody, but again, related to sport and inspiration. So I had a saying which said, so again, another positive affirmation. My saying during my treatment was, I can, I will, and I'm doing this. And it's very basic, but I just repeated that to myself again and again. And I had this massive frame, and it's downstairs in our dining room. But they also did me this video. So my boss came into hospital and sat with me, and they did me this video, which is still on Vimeo, I think. but it basically has every major Nike sporting star. So Carl Lewis, all like the footballers are on there, Tiny Temper's on there, the CEO of Nike's on there, Phil Knight, the owner of Nike's on there. Who else is on there? Niles Barkley. Oh my God. Mo Farah, Paula Ratcliffe, and Lance Armstrong's on there at the end, but this is before he got busted.
Yeah.
The last one's Lance Armstrong saying, Gemma, if you need anything, please just give me a call. And I'm like, and then he got busted then in the January, so that's a bit controversial. But still, to go to that length, that everybody in that video was saying, you can, you will, you're doing this, good luck, Gemma. Like, they were all personal messages from the world's best.
Wow. That does speak volumes. Like, a company doesn't have to do that. Many companies wouldn't do that.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that made me realize that at Nike, I wasn't just a number or an employee. I was a person that they cared about. And so for me, there was no question that I was going back to Nike, like no question at all. So, but what happened was I also didn't want to stay in Leicester. So what I didn't want to do was, I had my job at Nike to go back to anyway, so I'd have to have left my job, which never even crossed my mind. But I also wanted to get out of Leicester because I didn't want to drive past the hospital. Like I had something in my head where I was like, I need cancer not to define me. I need to get away from everything. And I think this probably was the wrong thing to do, because I actually went back to work quite quickly. So I went back to work in the February, but instead of going, so finished November, December, then by February I was back at work.
Okay.
Which
a month off.
Yeah, which is very, pretty quick, because I had no hair at the time, so I was, had a bald head, like I didn't look who I was before. I was still recovering from my treatment, and I went back on reduced hours initially, but the biggest thing, and probably the biggest mistake, was that we moved down to London because I wanted to. So my job was field based before, so I was in Leicestershire and at home, and living in our house, and then we moved down to London. So I just finished treatment a couple of months ago. I was down in London with my mum looking for a flat. I was starting work in the office, which the office is Wardour Street, so central London. I was going from Teddington to Oxford Street, which was, we moved to Teddington because we had friends there. It's amazing for running. You've got Richmond Park, Bushy Park. So running was still important to me to get back to.
Yeah.
But then again, this is probably where my tunnel vision and stubbornness didn't end up too well for me, because I don't think it was a good decision now looking back going to London. But I think I needed to do it. I think I needed to know if London was right for me or not. And my poor husband, so Lewis, I moved us down. So he didn't have a job when we moved down, and he'd been in hospital with me, been through all this, everything that we've been through. And I just said, I need to go to London. And he was like, okay, we'll go. So he's
quite a guy. I feel he's maybe like an unsung hero of this.
Yeah, you need to get him on. He's great.
I might, because I think actually in some ways, going through the cancer treatment yourself is easy, in that like you can be very tunnel visioned. It is a very straightforward, it tends to be quite straightforward. And please, anyone listening to this and thinks that it's not, please come back and challenge me. But I think it's quite straightforward, and sort of like what you need to do, it's like head down, get through the treatment. But for everyone around you, like, how the hell do you support this person? And like, Lewis seems to have done a great job with you. So like,
yeah. And you're right, because I think I'd been on, I was on an emotional roller coaster going through cancer, but I think I'd struggle supporting somebody else through it, because it's, you don't have much control either, and you don't know how that person's feeling or thinking. And Lewis was, he was absolutely brilliant. Like, he was like the bed up in the hospital in my room, slept there like, all the time, and was pretty much with me every single day, and same with my mum. And he wasn't my husband at the time either. He was my boyfriend who didn't know what was going to happen, and it was just amazing. So when it came to move down to London, he agreed, and he ended up getting a job at a school as a bit like working with behavioural kids as a support worker and that side of things. But I, after the problem was I worked in the office and realised that as amazing as the Nike office is, as inspiring it is, it was still an office. And I realised very quickly that I don't think office environments are right for me. I don't know, mentally I think I was trying to live a life of somebody that how I describe it is that I felt like I was looking at somebody else's life that I was living. So I always call it an out of body experience, but when you feel like you're just going through your day and it's not you and you're a bit numb to it. So after 8 months, I was like, I thought the commute into London and into the office would be glamorous, like me reading my book on the train, and the reality of it is
underground experience and going off to be part of the financial hub of the United Kingdom. And I know other friends who kind of say they kind of love that idea of the London rush and that purpose and the busyness and the kind of getting sucked into that sort of purpose, I suppose, that a lot of people feel from it.
Yeah, and I think you have a certain idea about it, and you do, like you say, you think it's glamorous. It's like going to the office, reading your book, seeing everybody, grabbing your coffee or your tea, going out for after work drinks. And the reality is not like that. Like some people might be, and I know some people absolutely thrive on it, they love it. But for me, after about a week, I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrific. So like, I mean, I was already quite tired because 2 months, 3 months after treatment, you're still dealing with cancer-related fatigue years down the line. And I was still having to go back to Leicester for my hospital appointments as well. But the reality of it was a busy train, it was cramped, it was hot. I was wasting my time commuting, going into an office that was, the same people that I worked with before. But again, I felt like I was being molded into something that I wasn't by working in an office and having that real structure and rules and regulations that I didn't think that I don't thrive on in a working life. Like that's why I really enjoy working from home, and I think my mind's quite creative, so I'm better when I'm out running or doing something or not in a real structured environment. And I think and then London was also tiring. Like it was just, I'd get back on the train on Oxford Street and it was so busy, and I felt like a number in London and I didn't feel like I mattered. And I think after 8 months, I sat down in our flat in London, in Teddington, and I just turned to Lewis. I was like, Lewis, got something I want to discuss with you. And he was like, what? And I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, I really don't like this life. And my perspective had changed massively. Like, I was going into work with a wig on. Like, I didn't go in with bald head. I actually put a wig on.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, and I remember going out running at some lunch times and taking the wig off and putting my baseball hat on, and it was just, people say going through cancer is hard, and but things like that seem so small to other people. I struggled mentally with that, like being in an office where I'd stand in the kitchen with a wig on. Like I knew that everybody knew that was a wig. I didn't feel comfortable, and I just didn't feel normal, if that makes sense. Like my normality was going in at a hospital for the last 6-7 months, and then I was just back at work, and you kind of like, everybody just expects it to go back to normal, but inside your head you're dealing with so many different types and forms of emotion. It's scary, really.
Yeah, I think there's just such a need to kind of process what's happened, because I found one of the best things that my friends could do was just be normal, and have that normality when I was going through treatment. But then to go into an environment where you're expected to be normal to perform your job, and everyone is just kind of, it almost sounded like it was normal because that was more convenient for everyone else, rather than it was normal because they were trying to support you and give you normality when everything else wasn't normal when you're going through treatment.
Yeah, it's really, when you say it like that, it's really difficult to know what I wanted. Like, I think I wanted people to be normal, but I think I in my mind, I knew that perhaps it's because I knew that I wasn't happy being in London and in that environment. It wasn't about, because the people I worked with are incredible, it wasn't about them, but I guess some of my worries that I also had is like when I met new people, like they didn't know anything about me, they didn't know my history, so I just sat there feeling like I didn't belong because I'd been through something 4 months ago that they had no idea about, and it just all felt, I think it's really hard to describe, but it all just felt very, very strange and weird. And I think maybe I didn't deal with it as well as I thought I did, and that's why perhaps I wanted to move out of London very quickly.
I think it's such a difficult thing to deal with. I told my friends, like my classmates at Oxford, that I had cancer. I was going through treatment because I was at that point. But basically, no one else. I didn't tell anyone else when I was at Oxford, and that made it really difficult because there's this really big part of my life that I'm not telling you about because I don't want it to. I didn't even know how I felt about it, but I certainly didn't want it to be a focus. So I think it is so difficult, and it was only when I kind of went public with Bristol to Beijing that I was like, this is now out in the open, and I guess in some ways it's a relief, but in other ways it's it's certainly like a very vulnerable situation to put oneself in.
Yeah, and I guess like you say, like we're all very different, but neither of us nobody can really prepare. I guess what I tried to do is prepare for that situation, and I think I soon realised that you probably do have to go through the real ups and downs to figure out how you deal with that situation. Sometimes you don't necessarily deal with it, but you find out where you're most comfortable and where you're most happy, and maybe that's where you needed to be. And I think that's perhaps what happened to me, that after 8 months I realised this wasn't where I was most comfortable, this wasn't where I was happy, because I think once I moved back to Loughborough, I moved back after a year and a half actually, so I did spend a year and a half in London, but once I moved back I felt like a weight had just lifted off my head again, and I think the numbness started to go, and I think I don't describe it as post-traumatic stress. Well, it can be described as that, but I'm not diagnosed myself, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think there was a lot of trauma that perhaps I hadn't dealt with in terms of the emotions of going through cancer treatment, that London probably just added to that trauma that I didn't really deal with. Because I think when I came back home and was around really close friends, my family all the time, like Lewis, and we were a lot happier where we were, I think that really helped me just to deal with everything and lift that numbness and give my mind a bit of a break, because I think London doesn't allow that really.
It's very full on, isn't it? It's just if you enjoy being in like the whirlwind, your feet never really touch the ground, and that can be incredibly exhilarating, but I think that has its own problems as well.
Yeah, it does. And I think from a career, like you said before, I was really driven with my career, and I'm extremely driven with what I do now with the charity, but I also have, back then I didn't want to dedicate myself to a company that are amazing, but that the reality is the goal is to sell shoes. Like I knew that I had an experience in life that I didn't want it to be defined by cancer. So first of all, I never wanted anything to do with it. I think that was the reason I moved to London, because I didn't want anything to do with cancer.
Okay.
And then in terms of like work or anything, then I soon realised I'd been through something, and I'd learned something very powerful about sport and exercise on my physical and mental health, and realised that I could actually help other people who have been in a similar situation to me. And that's where the work of Move came about. So I think it was a realisation of, I've got a bigger calling in life really, and I can actually help people.
So tell us about Move and how it came about, because on one side it almost seems like anyone could have wanted to have just put that cancer in a box and just said, that's no longer part of my life, I don't want to even think about it, it's very painful, it brings back a lot of memories, but you've now, Move is all to do with helping people with cancer. So what was the journey that got you, why did you decide to set up Move, or was it even a decision? Did it just happen?
Yeah, it did kind of just happen really. I think I should have wrote a diary about it back then so I could remember more. My memory's never great, but I think after the Great North Run, I knew there was something powerful about keeping active and movement. The evidence wasn't fully there yet, but I knew that there was bits of evidence because I was reading it around that. And I knew from the way I felt, even though I was active before I had treatment, I knew how important it was from a pre-cancer perspective, actually. So having a fit and healthy body going into cancer, I think massively helps and is massively underestimated in terms of tolerance of treatment and any diagnosis, really. But also, like, that and the, you know, reducing those side effects and helping you to get through it a little bit better. But actually, when you're going through treatment, and then if you're lucky enough to get into recovery, how that also has an impact. And I think the biggest thing for me is I went on a couple of Teenage Cancer Trust Find Your Sense of Tumour conferences with some of the young people from Leicester. So as a patient and young person with cancer myself, and I just got talking to a lot of people there about, you know, there wasn't anything at the time around exercise. And I was just asking a few people like what their experience was, and there's a few that use yoga, and were like, actually, you know, it's really helped me without really realizing it, you know, without it being a big topic area.
Yeah.
Then I think I went, you know, that was after I went through the stage of, I think that was when I realized that corporate life wasn't for me, and I had something else that I wanted to do, and that I didn't want to put cancer in a box and move on from it. I wanted to help people, because I remember being at the Teenage Cancer Conference, and my hair had started to grow back at that point, and we did superheroes night, and I remember I felt a little bit, it felt weird to go to something like that initially, but then as soon as you're there, it was amazing, because again, you were with people who were it was out of my comfort zone, but people who understood without needing to talk about it. But I remember there being a disco on the night, and I remember looking at the dance floor, and there was wigs flying everywhere. There was all sorts of haircuts and people, and like, it was just madness on that dance floor. And it just made me laugh, and I was like, there is so much fun going on in this room. Like, if people could see that this is also part of the cancer journey. Like, it isn't all about sat in a hospital bed. There's more to it. And like, for me, everybody on the dance floor was moving, was having fun. And that's when I just thought, you know, there's a place for Move Charity. And at the time, I didn't have the name. Like, it's not a very original name either, but it said what I wanted it to do.
Yeah, does the business.
So that's where the ideas came from, and it didn't develop into a charity until 2016. So after I left Nike, I went to work at a county sports partnership in Loughborough University called Leicestershire and Rutland Sport. And I actually worked in the physical activity and health sports development department. So I looked after exercise referral for programme for the whole of Leicestershire. So what I wanted Move to be about. So I was working on Move in my own time at that point. But what I wanted it to be about was to provide support that I didn't receive when I was going through cancer treatment, but also support that was individual to the person going through cancer, so their cancer diagnosis, their health status, their own goals and their own needs. And what I knew was everybody was very individual. So I hadn't found anybody who was exactly the same as me. So no one who had the same diagnosis, who had the same exercise or sports goals or same life. So for me, I knew it was so important for what we did to be individual, because we could tick a lot of boxes by doing a mass program of just giving out loads of advice and stuff. But if I went on the internet and looked at exercise advice and it wasn't specific to me, it's not really going to help me too much.
Yeah, so you just won't really know. It's like, does this apply to me? Am I able to do this? Yeah, sure, you could go for a run if you feel well, but like, what does feeling well even mean? Like,
and please ask your doctor first. But my consultant just told me not to go for a run. So you know, there's I have still trouble around general advice, which there is a place for it, but I think that's why I was so passionate about the program that we first created, and that's how Move really started, was those individual programs. And initially, so I qualified as a cancer rehab instructor. So I had a sports science degree anyway. I did all my, when I was in London, working for Nike on the side, I did all my personal training qualifications, and then went to Dr. Anna Campbell's Can Rehab company and qualified as a cancer rehab instructor. So when I left London and in 2016 when we started the charity, I was I formed the charity, but then I was doing all of the delivery work from a cancer rehab perspective.
Right.
So,
You were the founder and the key instigator of the purpose of the charity. You were the thing that was delivering that purpose as well.
Yeah, and that was really important to me, because I felt like I needed to, we didn't have any money. Like, we had enough money to form the charity, and we didn't have much at all. And I was very lucky that at my job at Leicestershire Rental Sport, I was able to pitch to a local company. The charity wasn't even fully formed then, and I pitched to them about the idea of what we wanted to do, and they're called the Sandwich Brothers, and they supported me to basically give us a grant to pay me to work for a year for the charity to see what I could do.
Wow.
And they've supported us ever since, which is absolutely incredible, because I don't think we were a couple of weeks away from actually being registered. It was just me and my idea and my story, and they were the one company that have really stepped up and said, like, this is important what you're doing, and the value that gave to me. And we're only 4 years old, and for the first 3 years I pretty much ran everything in the charity myself, including the delivery of the charity programs. And then now we've got a very small team. So we've always had 4 trustees, but we've now got 7 trustees. And then we've got Lucy Gossage as a trustee and co-founder of 5K Away. We've got a fundraising manager, and we've got Helen Murray, who's our cancer rehab specialist, who took over my role in that. But then also Georgie, who's our operational manager for 5K Away. So I think for a charity that's only 4 years old, we're such a small team, but I believe the impact we have is really big. And the lives that you'll see from the case studies and the stories that come out from both 5K Away and our online program, it's life-changing.
Can you give us an example? Because it's hearing life-changing is a cheap word to use if I'm being provocative, but tell us how it's life-changing.
Yeah, so we've had, from our online program, you'll see people, so we've got some digital case studies that Helen's pulled together. So to see the true impact, you've got to go to our social media pages on Instagram and on Twitter.
What do people search for that? How do they find it?
So if you search Move Charity on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, or 5K Your Way, you will be able to find both handles and be able to see the impact that we're having. But it was so from our online program, we work with young people between the ages of 13 and 30, and we've had people that never thought that they would walk again, now walking and doing exercise. We've had people who were never active before treatment, who have used physical activity and movement to basically change their lives. And we've had people that were active who are now getting back to the sport that they wanted to do. So I think you've got to watch the case studies to be able to see the impact that it's had. But again, with our 5K Away, so we had question and answer this week with Sue and Tony. And Sue's 17. She came on the tandem, Sue did, with you.
She did, yeah. Sue was the most incredible 72-year-old that I know, I think.
Exactly, and she, 72, and she never ran before. So she said herself, I've never ran or done anything like this before she was diagnosed with cancer. And she saw the banner in the Nottingham Hospital and came down for the first time to our 5K Away group in Nottingham. And now she's running park runs under 40 minutes. And one of the celebrations was jumping into a lake after a park run, and after she'd broken 40 minutes, stark naked with wellies on. That's 72-year-old Sue, and she just says, just take that first step, or just take that leap, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Because I had this conversation that really stayed me when I was in Cambridge on the first leg of Bristol to Beijing, and we were talking with some people from the Teenage Cancer Trust about how difficult it was to get people, teenagers, but I think all adults, all people, exercising, going through cancer treatment, or particularly when they haven't been exercising before. And maybe there are going to be some people listening to this who don't feel confident about exercising, or who haven't had a background in being particularly physically active. What would you say to them? have you been able to identify what kind of really helps people if people do want to start being a bit more active? What helps take those first steps?
So I think that's very true. Like, I think it was hard for me, who was already active, to get active during treatment or in recovery. And I think it's important to recognise that when we say about being active during treatment and also in recovery, we know that that's not easy, but also we know that, like, for example, I had 2 weeks, lots of periods of times of 2 weeks during my treatment where I couldn't get out of bed. And that's the reality. Like, we have to remember the reality. So we're not saying that it's right for all parts of your life or your journey. I think what the main thing is to think about doing something when you can. So when you feel okay and well enough to do it. And I think there's a whole emphasis to start with on just moving. So movement is really important, and what we're trying to get people to focus on is there's a shift in mindset that needs to happen first, which is why when we do our online programs, and Helen does all the work on this now, a lot of it is around the mindset. So a lot of people will be focusing on what they can't do and saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. So there's a lot around affirmations and the internal dialogue that you have with yourself, and that probably is the starting point, actually. Because that is what stops you from doing things in the first place, potentially. So that's part of it. The second thing is, I think it's finding out that everybody's individual, and what's right for somebody else isn't right for you. So I talk, my go-to and my therapy is running, but that doesn't mean that's right for anybody else. And it's the same with our 5K away program. That isn't going to be right for everybody. That's about walking, you can walk, jog, run, or you can come for a cup of tea if you want. So hopefully there's something in there. But again, that might not be right for somebody who's never been active, or somebody who loves football, for example. So one of the things is finding out something you enjoy that involves some sort of movement. And again, that's not that easy, but a trial and error period of doing that, you will be able to find somebody, something that you will be able to do. And I think thirdly, it's like, don't think that you just have to do this on your own. And I think that's why the impact of the work we have on our online cancer rehab support program, but also 5K away, is when you're able to do something with other people, or sometimes for other people, you end up making changes to your life that you never thought possible. So sometimes it may be helping somebody else achieve things that actually helps you to go on and move more, or do what you want to do.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think there's so much power in doing something with someone else, and I'm a big believer in kind of being selfish, and that sort of helping. If you help yourself, you're going to be better able to help other people. And it's being selfish in that sense. And identifying those opportunities when, by helping someone else, you're helping yourself. And then it's kind of like, I'm not sure I believe in true altruism. And I'm very happy to be challenged on that in the comment section, or maybe, but, I don't see it as a negative thing either, that like, if we work in self-interest, that can also have like a very positive impact on the other people around us.
Oh, massively. Yeah. And I think, so when you were saying about, there's also a point of when you're saying about how do people become active if it's not their norm, or they haven't had positive experiences with exercise. And going on from the points that I've just made, there is a huge element of health professionals playing a big role in this. And this is something that myself, Lucy, and I know Dr. Anna Campbell, for example, and a lot of organisations are starting to work towards, is that so, for example, the consultant who told me you never run for a year post chemotherapy, like, that is really damaging potentially, because if I stuck to that, then I could have potentially been in a worse place health-wise than I was. So it's not to blame the consultants, because the education isn't or wasn't there, but it's also, you will find that if a health professional, for example, has a negative relationship with exercise themselves, or isn't active, they are very unlikely to talk about it in a positive way, which then will affect your decisions and won't inspire you to move a little bit more, or won't even have a conversation about it. And I think that's something that needs to be improved and needs to be recognised first, because like now with COVID-19, it's like everyone's got this exercise token that they can use once per day, and because the whole government has said exercise is important. You've got to stay in your house all day, but exercise is important. How many more people do you see on the streets?
Yeah,
like,
it's amazing, actually.
yeah. So the importance of exercise is being shown. So if that's shown consistently across cancer care pathways, that is the magic. It's not going to change everybody. Again, people will make decisions to not do it, but that is a big influence on then people thinking that it's a positive thing to do while they're going through treatment.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm conscious that we've had an amazing conversation already, but we probably need to wrap it up. I have one question I really want to ask, which is, you said you had to deal with the uncertainty for 5 years of not, going through the scans and not knowing if you were going to have to go back into treatment and whether you were going to, in all likelihood, stay in long-term remission. This is something I'm facing. How did you deal with that uncertainty?
If I'm absolutely honest, by running. It was the only way I knew how, and it saved. Having amazing family and friends helps, but running, I think saves me, and still does. And and like it just mentally makes me feel okay with life. And for me with running, I'm still competitive, so I still have goals within my running. And I think without that, I wouldn't be the same person. And, it helps my mindset. It helps me mentally. And, I didn't really suffer much anxiety from it. And I think that's because of running, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I and I think that's, it's not for me, it's the first thing that I think of. So I could, there probably are other factors, but I always come back to the fact that running is just such an amazing thing for me to do for myself, that gives me goals and it gives me dreams and inspires me. And I think that's still important to have as well, to deal with that period of time.
Yeah, and I guess what other people can take away from this is maybe finding something that does give each individual dreams, and that's probably not going to be running for most people, but there probably will be something that gives you that makes you excited and gives you a bit of peace of mind as well, I suppose.
Absolutely. And like you say, like we can only share, I can only share what has worked for me and what's my experience, and that isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea. But like you say, it doesn't have to be sport related either, but it's just, and I think I was thinking about this before we started to talk, and I think that there is something said for also, it's great to have aspirations, because I think that I have these dreams, but then it makes me focus on the process. But there's also something to be said about, look, we don't always have to have these huge challenges and huge dreams, but actually, like, we're learning now to be able to live in the moment and appreciate the little things in life. So I think that's one thing I learned from cancer. Like, I remember when I first finished my treatment, I was going to do all these incredible things. Like, I was going to do Everest Base Camp, I was going to go on holiday to Florida, I was going to try and do all these challenges.
Right.
Because you feel like you don't, life's just, it was taken away from you, it could be taken away from you. I need to do all of this stuff. But sometimes that can become really overwhelming. And sometimes the key to happiness is being okay with where you are right now, and actually being able to sit back and just live in that particular moment in time, and not have to have your mind racing about 100 different things that you need to achieve, or the bucket list that you need to tick off. Like, that's amazing, but actually having the ability to sit in the moment can be really powerful. And to know that, we don't have to do all these incredible things, that doesn't define us. Defining us is just sometimes about taking a step back and being okay with who we are and where we are. So
that seems like a great place to end right there. Being happy with who we are, where we are, acceptance. I think that's really powerful. Yeah. Gemma, thank you so much for sharing your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like I've learned quite a lot. I've learned a different perspective to my own, which I think is always exciting. And I'm really excited to see where Move goes in the next in the next year, in the next 5 years, and I'm going to be linking some information about it below with the podcast. So yeah, thank you so much.
Can I also just say before we go as well, a big thank you to you as well, Luke, for supporting us through your challenges and your journey, so supporting us as a charity, because as a girl who founded a small charity and now runs a small charity, I can't tell you how amazing that is to be, to be following you and watching your journey and be part of that as well. And you've done incredible things with what you've done, and people can see it from your social media, but it's really helped us, like the fundraising that you've done, the awareness you've done. As us as a charity working with you, we've been able to bring Georgie on board, who's then taking 5K away to another level to support even more people. So the knock-on effect of what you're doing is huge. So I just want to say from me a big thank you for continuing to support us, but also continue to inspire us through everything you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gemma. That's really kind, and I feel well. I didn't shirk away from like the idea of setting up a charity, but I realised I would have to have it's a hell of a lot of work, and there are so many challenges with that, and that could be a discussion for a whole other podcast. The challenges of setting up a charity and operating as a small charity, but yeah, comment below if you would like to hear that, because I think there'll be a super interesting conversation as well.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear that. I'd love to have a conversation with a few people about that, because I often feel alone actually in that world when you're setting up a charity.
Yeah.
And, actually, how do other people feel? Like, it can be very overwhelming. There's lots to do. So yeah, that would be a really interesting podcast.
Okay, right. Well, it looks like you'll be back on.
Hopefully we can bring more people on to give us an insight into how you do it well as well.
I think that would be a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen.
Real.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Gemma. And I want to say kind of enjoy your run, but you've already been on a run today, but maybe you've got another one coming up. I don't know. 2-run day, but
I'm going to enjoy my cup of tea after this that I'll go and get.
Okay. Yeah, and I've got a bit of coffee to plow through. So, Gemma, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Luke.
All right. Bye.
Bye.